Hi, Maestro. Come on up. Hi, Marius. Hey, Carell. How are you guys doing? Switch over to, let's see. I think we're doing, yeah, this is the right one. I like the lights making this look a little purpley. So sorry about canceling stream last weekend. It was a pretty rough week last week because it was right after um, California had amended the earlier masks off thing, and then they're like, "Oh, hey, guess what? Uh, we're going to amend it." So it was tricky. There have been people yelling at people, and it was very high stress. But we survived. And for the most part, like our customers have been really nice, but there have been a few that have just been horrible. Like, being mean not to change us, but to attack us is a bit, yeah. Hi, Maestro. You're so cute. He's got him right down. There he is. Hi. My little kitty overlord. By the way, this shirt, there we go. This shirt is one of my new very many shirts that I got from Out of Print Clothing Company. I love their stuff. And I just went a bit nuts 2 weeks ago. I will give Maestro a treat. Hey, Pants, you ready for treats? So I've got a ton of stuff just piled on top of a little treat canister. There you go. This is from Corel. There's still one more, silly. I think he missed getting the treats last week. But yeah, anyways, this particular shirt I got especially because it is a quote from Frederick Douglass, and I wanted to commemorate the video that's gotten the highest views on my YouTube channel, which at last count today was about 157. Okay, there we go. Yeah. About 157 views on the Heroic Slave Part 1, which many students have been using it for their school rating, which is like super, super awesome for me. And so it is a quote from Frederick Douglass. Let's try to. Sorry about all the moving. Yeah, once you learn to read, you will live forever. You will be forever free. So, funny little extra story to go along with it. When I had ordered it, I have to get like the highest size that they have because I am quite a worldly shape, and they emailed me back and they're like, "I'm so sorry, we're all out of your size. You can pick another shirt, another design, we'll send it to you." And so I'm like, well, that's a bummer because I wanted to, commemorate my top viewed video on YouTube with it. But I'll go ahead and do this one. It's a Fight Evil Read Books shirt. I have 2 or 3 of those right now. Maybe 3. And sister has one as well. So anyways, they emailed me back and they're like, Oh, that's great. Congrats on the video. By the way, we found the missing box and your shirt is in there. And we'll also send you the Fight Evil Read Books one for free. So that's my fun little story about that. So I hope things have been going well for you guys. I hope you're all healthy and staying cool or warm, depending on, part of the world that you are at. Like, why am I forgetting? Mr. Brightside, that's right. Bright and UK, I know, are both down in Australia, so they would be, I hope you're keeping warm. So if you're watching this in VODs, hope you're keeping warm, guys. Should we go ahead and get started, though? I've had to super refresh my memory on where we left off in Orlando since it's been 2 weeks. Where did it go? There it is. It's down here. I also didn't need to buy any more bookmarks or tote bag or anything like that, but like a lot of companies, they're having this special fundraiser thing where everything on their Pride line, they're donating a portion of the proceeds to like one of the many LGBT charities and stuff like that. So Out of Print donated to the Trevor Project, which is to try to provide help and counseling to LGBT youth to try to prevent suicide. So I'm like, yeah, I'll go nuts in their Pride section. So I got, it's here somewhere. Hang on a sec. There you go. Aha, here it is. My fancy little Shelf Love little bit of rain bonus. Although it's missing the purple. Alrighty. Oh, and forgot to crack this open, so we get a little bit of ASMR. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. Let's make Maestro go invisible. Alright, so it is Orlando, Chapter 3. It is indeed highly unfortunate, and much to be regretted, that at this stage of Orlando's career, when he played a most important part in the public life of his country, we have least information to go upon. We know that he discarded his duties to admiration, witness his bath and his dukedom. We know that he had a finger in some of the most delicate negotiations between King Charles and the Turks. To that, treaties in the vault of the Record Office bear testimony. But the revolution which broke out during his period of office, and the fire which followed, have so damaged or destroyed all those papers from which any trustworthy record could be drawn, that what we can give is lamentably incomplete. Often the paper was scorched a deep brown in the middle of the most important sentence, just when we thought to elucidate a secret that has puzzled historians for 100 years. There was a hole in the manuscript big enough to put your finger through. We have done our best to piece out a meager summary from the charred fragments that remain, but often it has been necessary to speculate, to surmise, and even to use the imagination. Orlando's day was passed, it would seem, somewhat in this fashion. About 7 he would rise, wrap himself in a long Turkish cloak, light a cheroot, and lean his elbows on the parapet. Thus he would stand, gazing at the city beneath him. Hi, my Snoggings. You going to come up too? She's going to think about it. Thus he would stand, gazing at the city beneath him, apparently entranced. At this hour the mist would lie so thick that the domes of Santa Sofia and the rest would seem to be afloat. Gradually the mist would uncover them. The bubbles would be seen to be firmly fixed. There would be the river, there the Galata Bridge, there the green-turbaned pilgrims without eyes or noses, begging alms, there the pariah dogs picking up offal, there the shawled women, there the innumerable donkeys, there the men on horses carrying long poles. Soon the whole town would be astir with the cracking of whips, the beating of gongs, cryings to prayer, lashing of mules, and rattle of brass-bound wheels, while sour odors, made from bread fermenting and incense and spice, rose even to the heights of Pera itself, and seemed the very breath of the strident, multicolored, and barbaric population. Nothing, he reflected, gazing at the view which was now sparkling in the sun, could be less like the countries of Surrey and Kent, or the towns of London and Tunbridge Wells. To the right and left rose in bald and stony prominence the inhospitable Aegean mountains, to which the arid castle of a robber chief or two might hang, but the parsonage there was none, nor manor house, nor cottage, nor elk, elm, violet, ivy, or wild eglantine. There were no hedges for ferns to grow on, and no fields for sheep to graze. The houses were white as eggshells and as bald. That he was English was root and fibre, should yet exult to the depths of his heart in this wild panorama, and gaze at those passes and far heights planning journeys, there alone on foot, where only the goat and shepherd had gone before. Should feel a passion of affection for the bright, unseasonable flowers, love the unkempt pariah dogs beyond even his elk hounds at home, and snuff the arid, sharp smell of the streets eagerly into his nostrils, surprised him. He wondered if, in the season of the Crusades, one of his ancestors had taken up with the Circassian peasant woman. Thought it possible, fancied a certain darkness in his complexion, and, going indoors again, withdrew to his bath. An hour later, properly scented, curled, and anointed, he would receive visits from secretaries and other high officials, carrying, one after another, red boxes which yielded only to his own golden key. Within were papers of the highest importance, of which only fragments here flourish, here a seal firmly attached to a piece of burnt silk, now remain. Of their contents, then, we cannot speak, but can only testify that Orlando was kept busy, that with his wax and seals, his various colored ribbons, which had to be diversely attached, his engrossing of titles and making of flourishes round capital letters, till luncheon came, a splendid meal of perhaps 30 courses. The courses, I don't think, were nearly as large as our courses tend to be, or at least our courses in America. After luncheon, lackeys announced that his coach and six was at the door, and he went, preceded by purple janissaries running on foot and waving great ostrich feather fans above their heads, to call upon the other ambassadors and dignitaries of state. The ceremony was always the same. On reaching the courtyard, the janissaries struck with their fans upon the main portal, which immediately flew open, revealing a large chamber, splendidly furnished. Here were seated two figures, generally of the opposite sexes. Profound bows and curtsies were exchanged. In the first room, it was permissible only to mention the weather. Having said that it was fine or wet, hot or cold, the ambassador then passed on to the next chamber, where again two figures rose to greet him. Here it was only permissible to compare Constantinople as a place of residence with London, and the ambassador naturally said that he preferred Constantinople, and the host naturally said, though they had not seen it, that they preferred London. In the next chamber, King Charles's and the Sultan's health had to be discussed at some length. In the next were discussed the ambassador's health and that of his host's wife, but more briefly. In the next, the ambassador complimented his host upon his furniture, and the host complimented the ambassador upon his dress. In the next, sweetmeats were offered, the host deploring their badness, the ambassador extolling their goodness. The ceremony ended at length with the smoking of a hookah and the drinking of a glass of coffee, but though the motions of smoking and drinking were gone through punctiliously, there was neither tobacco in the pipe nor coffee in the glass, as, had either smoke or drink been real, the human frame would have sunk beneath the surfeit. For no sooner had the ambassador dispatched one such visit than another had to be undertaken. The same ceremonies were gone through in precisely the same order 6 or 7 times over the houses of the 6 or 7 times over at the houses of the other great officials, so that it was often late at night before the ambassador reached home. Though Orlando performed these tasks to admiration and never denied that they are, perhaps, the most important part of a diplomatist's studies, he was undoubtedly fatigued by them, and often depressed to such a pitch of gloom that he preferred to take his dinner alone with his dogs. To them, indeed, he might be heard talking in his own tongue, and sometimes, it is said, he would pass out of his own gates late at night, so disguised that the sentries did not know him. Then he would mingle with the crowd on the Galata Gate, or Galata Bridge, or stroll through the bazaars, or throw aside his shoes and join the worshippers in the mosques. Once, when it was given out that he was ill of a fever, shepherds, bringing their goats to market, reported that they had met an English lord on the mountain-top and heard him praying to his God. This was thought to be Orlando himself, and his prayer was, no doubt, a poem said aloud, for it was known that he still carried about with him, in the bosom of his cloak, a much-scored manuscript, and servants, listening at the door, heard the ambassador chanting something in an odd sing-song voice when he was alone. It is with fragments such as these that we must do our best to make up a picture of Orlando's life and character at this time. There exist, even to this day, rumors, legends, anecdotes of the floating and unauthenticated kind about Orlando's life in Constantinople. We have quoted but a few of them, which go to prove that he possessed, now that he was in the prime of his life, the power to stir the fancy and rivet the eye, which will keep memory green long after all that more durable qualities can do to preserve it is forgotten. The power is a mysterious one, compounded by beauty, birth, and some rarer gift, which we may call glamour, and have done with it. 1,000,000 candles, as Sasha had said, burnt in him without his being at the trouble of lighting a single one. He moved like a stag, without any need to think about his legs. He spoke in his ordinary voice, and echo beat a silver gong. Hence rumors gathered round him. He became the adored of many women and some men. It was not necessary that they should speak to him, even that they should see him. They conjured up before them, especially when the scenery was romantic, or the sun was setting, the figure of a noble gentleman in silk stockings. Upon the poor and uneducated he had the same power as upon the rich. Shepherds, gypsies, donkey drivers still sing songs about the English lord who dropped his emeralds in the well, which undoubtedly refer to Orlando, who once, it seemed, tore his jewels from him in a moment of rage or intoxication, and flung them in a fountain, whence they were fished by a page-boy. But this romantic power, it is well known, is often associated with a nature of extreme reserve. Orlando seems to have made no friends. As far as is known, he formed no attachments. A certain great lady came all the way from London in order to be near him, and pestered him with her attention, but he continued to discharge his duties so indefatigably that he had not been the ambassador at the Horn more than 2 years and a half before King Charles signified his intention of raising him to the highest rank in the peerage. The envious said that this was Nell Gwyn's tribute to the memory of a leg. She was the person who pestered him at the end of the previous chapter and sent him packing. The envious said that this was now Gwen's tributary to the memory of a leg, but as she had seen him only once, and was then busily engaged in pelting her royal master with nutshells, it is likely that it was his merits that won him his dukedom, not his calves. Here he must pause, for we have reached a moment of great significance in his career, for the conferring of the dukedom was the occasion of a very famous, and indeed much disputed incident, which we must now describe, picking our way among burnt papers and little bits of tape as best we may. It was at the end of the great fast of Ramadan that the Order of the Bath and the Patient of Nobility arrived in a frigate commanded by Sir Adrian Scrope, and Orlando made this the occasion for his entertainment, more splendid than any that has been known before or since in Constantinople. The night was fine, the crowd immense, and the windows of the embassy brilliantly illuminated. Again, details were lacking, for the fire had its way with all such records, and was left only tantalizing fragments which leave the most important points obscure. From the diary of John Frenner Brigg, however, an English naval officer who was among the guests, we gather that people of all nationalities were packed like herrings in a barrel in the courtyard. The crowd pressed so unpleasantly close that Brigg soon climbed into a Judas tree, the better to observe the proceedings. The rumor had got about among the natives, and here is additional proof of Orlando's mysterious power over the imagination, that some kind of miracle was to be performed. Thus, writes Brigg, but his manuscript is full of burns and holes, some sentences being quite illegible. When the rockets began to soar into the air, there was considerable uneasiness among us lest the native population should be seized, fraught with unpleasant consequences to all. English ladies in the company, I own that my hand went to my cutlass. Happily, he continues in his somewhat long-winded style, these fears seemed for the moment groundless, and observing the demonstration of our skill in the art of pyrotechny was valuable, if only because it impressed upon them the superiority of the British. Indeed, the sight was one of indescribable magnificence. I found myself alternately praising the Lord that he had permitted, and wishing that my poor dear mother. These are all the burn holes in the manuscript, or why it sounds so choppy. By the ambassador's order, the long windows, which are so imposing a feature of Eastern architecture, for though ignorant in many ways, were thrown wide, and within we could see a tableau vivant, or theatrical display, in which English ladies and gentlemen represented a masque, the work of one. The words were inaudible, but the sight of so many of our countrymen and women, dressed with the highest elegance and distinction, moved me to emotion of which I am certainly not ashamed, though unable. I was intent upon observing the astonishing conduct of Lady, which was of a nature to fasten the eyes of all upon her, and to bring discredit upon her sex and country, when, unfortunately, a branch of the Judas tree broke. Lieutenant Brigg fell to the ground, and the rest of the entry records only his gratitude to Providence, who plays a very large part in the diary, and the exact nature of his injuries. Happily, Miss Penelope Hartop, daughter of the general of that name, saw the scene from inside, and carried on a tale in the letter, which much defaced too, which ultimately reached a female friend at Turnbridge Wells. Miss Penelope was no less lavish in her enthusiasm than the gallant officer. "Ravishing," she exclaims 10 times on one page. "Wondrous, utterly beyond description. Gold plate, candelabras, servants in plush breeches, pyramids of ice, fountains of negus, jellies made to represent His Majesty's ships, swans made to resplendent water lilies, birds in golden cages, gentlemen in slashed crimson velvet, ladies' headdresses at least 6 foot high, musical boxes. Mr. Peregrine said I looked quite lovely, which I only repeat to you, my dearest, because I know. Oh, how I longed for you all! Surpassing anything we have seen at the Pantiles. Ocean to drink, some gentlemen overcome. Lady Betty ravishing. Poor Lady Bonham made the unfortunate mistake of sitting down without a chair beneath her. Gentlemen all very gallant. Wished 1,000 times for you and dearest Betsy. But the sight of all the others, the cynosure of all eyes, as all admitted, for none could be so vile as to deny it, was the ambassador himself. Such a leg, such a countenance, such princely manners. To see him come into the room, to see him go out again, and something interesting in the expression which makes one feel, one scarcely knows why, that he has suffered. You see, a lady was the cause of it, the heartless monster. How can one of our reputed tender sex have had the effrontery? He is unmarried, and half the ladies in the palace are wild for love of him. 1,000 kisses to Tom, Jerry, Peter, and dearest Mew, presumably her cat. From the Gazette of the time, we gather that as the clock struck 12, the ambassador appeared on the center balcony, which was hung with priceless rugs. 6 Turks of the imperial bodyguard, each over 6 feet in height, held torches to his right and left. Rockets rose into the air at his appearance, and a great shout went up from the people, which the ambassador acknowledged, bowing deeply, and speaking a few words of thanks in the Turkish language, which it was one of his accomplishments to speak with fluency. Next, Sir Adrian Scope, in the full dress of a British admiral, advanced. The ambassador knelt on one knee. The admiral placed the collar of the most noble order of the Bath around his neck, then pinned the star to his breast. After which another gentleman of the diplomatic corps, advancing in a stately manner, placed on his shoulders the ducal robes, and handed him, on a crimson cushion, the ducal coronet. At length, with a gesture of extraordinary majesty and grace, first bowing profoundly, then raising himself proudly erect, Orlando took the golden circlet of strawberry leaves and placed it, with a gesture which none that saw it ever forgot, upon his brows. It was at this point that the first disturbance began. Either the people had expected a miracle, some say a shower of gold was prophesied to fall from the sky, which did not happen, or this was the signal chosen for the attack to begin. Nobody seems to know, but as the coronet settled on Orlando's brow, a great uproar rose. Bells began ringing. The harsh cries of the prophets were heard above the shouts of the people. Many Turks fell flat to the ground and touched the earth with their foreheads. A door burst open. The natives pressed into the banqueting room. Women shrieked. A certain lady, who was said to be dying for love of Orlando, seized a candelabra and dashed it to the ground. What might not have happened, had it not been for the presence of Sir Andrew Scope and a squad of British blue jackets, nobody can say. But the admiral ordered the bugles to be sounded. 100 blue jackets stood instantly at attention. The disorder was quelled, and quiet, at least for the time being, fell upon the scene. So far we are on the firm, if rather narrow, ground of ascertained truth, but nobody has ever known exactly what took place later that night. The testimony of the sentries and others seemed, however, to prove that the embassy was empty of company, and shut up for the night in the usual way by 2 a.m. The ambassador was seen to go to his room, still wearing the insignia of his rank, and shut the door. Some say he locked it, which was against his custom. Others maintained that they heard music of a rustic kind, such as shepherds play, later that night in the courtyard under the ambassador's window. A washerwoman who was kept awake by a toothache saw that said that she saw a man's figure wrapped in a cloak or dressing gown come out upon the balcony. Then she said a woman, much muffled, but apparently of the peasant class, was drawn up by means of a rope which the man let down to her on the balcony. There the washerwoman said they embraced passionately like lovers, and went into the room together, drawing the curtains so that no more could be seen. Next morning, the Duke, as we must now call him, was found by his secretaries sunk in profound slumber, amid bedclothes that were much tumbled. Kitty fur. The room was in some disorder, his coronet having rolled on the floor, and his cloak and garter being flung all of a heap on a chair. The table was littered with papers. No suspicion was left at first, as the fatigues of the night had been great. But when afternoon came and he still slept, a doctor was summoned. He applied remedies which had been used on the previous occasion, plasters, nettles, emetrics, etc., but without success. Orlando slept on. His secretaries then thought it their duty to examine the papers on the table. Many were scribbled over with poetry, in which frequent mention was made of an oak tree. There were also various state papers, and others of a private nature concerning the management of his estates in England, but at length they came upon a document of far greater significance. It was nothing less, indeed, than a deed of marriage drawn up, signed, and witnessed between his lordship, Orlando, Knight of the Garter, etc., etc., and Rosina Pepita, a dancer, father unknown, but reputed a gypsy, mother also unknown, but reputed a seller of old iron in the marketplace over against the Galata Bridge. The secretaries looked at each other in dismay, and still slept Orlando. Morning and evening they watched him, but save that his breathing was regular, and his cheeks still flushed with habitual deep rose, he gave no sign of life. Whatever science and ingenuity could do to waken him, they did, but still he slept. On the 7th day of his trance, Thursday, 10 May, the first shot was fired of that terrible and bloody insurrection of which Lieutenant Brigg had detected the first symptoms. The Turks rose against the Sultan, set fire to the town, and put every foreigner they could find either to the sword or to the bastinado. A few English managed to escape, but as might have been expected, the gentlemen of the British Embassy preferred to die in defense of their red boxes, or, in extreme cases, to swallow bunches of keys rather than let them fall into the hands of the infidel. The rioters broke into Orlando's room, but seeing him stretched to all appearances dead, they left him untouched, and only robbed him of his coronet and the ropes of the garter. And now again obscurity descends, and would indeed that it were deeper. Would we almost have it in our hearts to exclaim that it were so deep that we could see nothing whatever through its opacity. Would that we might here take the pen and write fini to our work. Would that he would spare the reader what is to come, and say to him in so many words, Orlando died and was buried. But here, alas, truth, candor, and honesty, the austere gods who keep watch and ward by the inkpot of the biographer, cry no. Putting their silver trumpets to their lips, they demand in one blast, truth! And again they cry truth, and sounding yet third time in concert, they peal forward the truth, and nothing but the truth. At which, heaven be praised, for it affords us a breathing space, the doors gently open, as if a breath of the gentlest and holiest zephyr had wafted them apart, and 3 fingers enter. First comes Our Lady of Purity, whose brows are bound with whose brows are bound with fillets of the whitest lamb's wool, whose hair is as an avalanche of the driven snow, and in whose hand reposes the white quill of a virgin goose. Following her, but with a statelier step, comes Our Lady of Chastity, in whose brow is set like a turret of burning but unwasting fire a diadem of icicles. Her eyes are pure stars, and her fingers, if they touch you, freeze you to the bone. Close behind her, sheltering indeed in the shadow of her more stately sisters, comes Our Lady of Modesty, frailest and fairest of the three, whose face is only shown as a young moon shown when it is thin and sickle-shaped and half-hidden among clouds. Each advances towards the center of the room where Orlando still lies sleeping, and with gestures at once appealing and commanding, Our Lady of Purity speaks first. I am the guardian of the sleeping fawn. The snow is dear to me, and the moon rising, and the silver sea. With my robes I cover the speckled hen's eggs and the brindled seashell. I cover vice and poverty. On all things frail or dark or doubtful my veil descends. Wherefore speak not, reveal not, spare, oh spare. Hear the trumpets peal forth. Purity avaunt! Begone, purity! Then Our Lady Chastity speaks. I am she whose touch freezes, and whose glance turns to stone. I have stayed the star in its dancing, and the wave as it falls. The highest Alps are my dwelling place, and when I walk the lightning flashes in my hair. Where my eyes fall, they kill. Rather than let Orlando wake, I will freeze him to the bone. Spare, oh spare! Hear the trumpets peal forth. Chastity avaunt! Begone, chastity! Then Our Lady of Modesty speaks, so low that one can hardly hear her. I am she that men call Modesty. Virgin I am, and ever shall be. Not for me the fruitful fields in the fertile vineyard. Increase is odious to me, and when the apples burgeon or the flocks breed, I run. I let my mantle fall. My hair covers my eyes. I do not see. Spare, oh spare. Again the trumpets peal forth. Modesty avaunt! Begone, modesty! With gestures of grief and lamentation, the three sisters now join hands and dance slowly, tossing their veils and singing as they go. Truth, come not out from your horrid den. Hide deeper, fearful truth. For you flaunt in the brutal gaze of the sun things that were best unknown and undone. You veil the shameful, the dark you make clear. You unveil the shameful, you make the dark clear. Hide, hide, hide! Here they make as if to cover Orlando with their draperies. The trumpets, meanwhile, still blare forth. The truth, and nothing but the truth. At this, the sisters try to cast their veils over the mouths of the trumpets so as to muffle them, but in vain, for now all the trumpets blare forth together. Horrid sisters, go! The sisters become distracted and wail in unison, still circling and flinging their veils up and down. It was not always been so, but men want us no longer. The women detest us. We go. I, Purity says this, to the hen roost. I, Chastity says this, to the still unravished heights of Surrey. I, Modesty says this, to any cozy nook where there are ivy and curtains in plenty. For there, not here, all speak together, joining hands and making gestures of farewell and despair towards the bed where Orlando lies sleeping. Dwell still in nest and boudoir, office and law court, those who love us, those who honor us, virgins and city men, lawyers and doctors, those who prohibit, those who deny, those who reverence without knowing why, those who praise without understanding, the still very numerous, heaven be praised, tribe of the respectable, who prefer to see not, desire to know not, love the darkness, who still worship us, and with reason, for we have given them wealth, prosperity, comfort, ease. To them we go, we leave. Come, sisters, come. This is no place for us here. They retire in haste, waving their draperies over their heads as if to shut out something that they dare not look upon, and close the door behind them. We are, therefore, now left entirely alone in the room with the sleeping Orlando and the trumpeters. The trumpeters, raging themselves side by side in order, blow one terrific blast, the truth, at which Orlando woke. He stretched himself, he rose, he stood upright in complete nakedness before us, and while the trumpets pealed, truth, 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 we have no choice left but confess he was a woman. I was wondering when that was going to happen. The sound of the trumpets died away, and Orlando stood stark naked. No human being, since the world began, has ever looked more ravishing. His form combined in one the strength of a man and a woman's grace. As he stood there, the silver trumpets prolonged their notes, as if reluctant to leave the lovely sight which their blast had called forth. And chastity, purity, and modesty, inspired, no doubt, by curiosity, peered in at the door and threw a garment like a towel at the naked form, which unfortunately fell short by several inches. Orlando looked himself up and down in a long looking-glass, without showing any signs of discomposure, and went, presumably, to his bath. Oh, this is the reason why I have, I have the colors of the gender-fluid flag. It's because Orlando is a gender-fluid character. You may take advantage of this pause in the narrative to make certain statements. Orlando had become a woman, there is no denying it, but in every other respect Orlando remained precisely as he had been. The change of sex, though it altered their future, did nothing whatever to alter their identity. Their faces remained, as their portraits prove, practically the same. His memory, but in future we must, for convenience sake, say her for his, and she for he. Her memory, then, went back through all the events of her past life without encountering any obstacle. Some slight haziness there may have been, as if a few dark drops had fallen into the clear pool of memory. Certain things had become a little dimmed. But that was all. The change seemed to have been accomplished painlessly and completely, and in such a way that Orlando herself showed no surprise at all. Many people, taking this into account and holding that such a change of sex is against nature, have been at great pains to prove, 1, that Orlando had always been a woman, 2, that Orlando is at this moment a man. Let biologists and psychologists determine. It is enough for us to state the simple facts. Orlando was a man till the age of 30, then he became a woman, and has remained so ever since. But let other pens treat of sex and sexuality. We quit such odious subjects as soon as we can. Orlando had now washed and dressed herself in those Turkish coats and trousers which can be worn indifferently by either sex, and was forced to consider her position. That is also why I chose this picture, because it looked like it could go either way. Same with the clothes. That it was precarious and embarrassing in the extreme must be the first thought of every reader who has followed her story with sympathy. Young, noble, beautiful, she had awoken to find herself in a position than which we can conceive none more delicate for a young lady of rank. We should not have blamed her as she rung the bell, screamed, or fainted, But Orlando showed now. Ugh, goodness. But Orlando showed no such signs of perturbation. All her actions were deliberate in the extreme, and might indeed have been thought to show tokens of premeditation. First, she carefully examined the papers on the table, took such as seemed to be written in poetry, and secreted them in her bosom. Next, she called her Seleucci hound, which had never left her bed all these days, though half famished with hunger, fed and combed him, then stuck a pair of pistols in her belt. Finally wound about her person several strings of emeralds and pearls of the finest orient which had formed part of her ambassadorial wardrobe. This done, she leant out of the window, gave one low whistle, and descended the shattered and blood-stained staircase, now strewn with a litter of waste-paper baskets, treaties, dispatches, seals, sealing wax, etc., and so entered the courtyard. There, in the shadow of a giant fig tree, waited an old gypsy on a donkey. He led another by the bridle. Orlando swung her leg over it, and thus, attended by a lean dog, riding a donkey, in company of a gypsy, the ambassador of Great Britain of the court of the Sultan left Constantinople. They rode for several days and nights, and met with a variety of adventures, some at the hands of men, some at the hands of nature, in all of which Orlando acquitted herself with courage. Within a week they reached the high ground outside Brusa, which was then the chief camping ground of the gypsy tribe to which Orlando had allied herself. Often she had looked at those mountains from her balcony at the embassy, often had longed to be there, and to find oneself where one has longed to be always, to a reflective mind, gives food for thought. For some time, however, she was too well pleased with the change to spoil it by thinking. The pleasure of having no documents to seal or sign, no flourishes to make, no calls to pay, was enough. The gypsies followed the grass, then the grass. When it was grazed down on, they moved again. She washed in streams if she washed at all. No boxes, red, blue, or green, were presented to her. There was no key, let alone a golden key, in the whole camp. As for visiting, the word was unknown. She milked the goats. She collected brushwood. She stole a hen's egg now and then, but always put a coin or a pearl in place of it. She herded cattle. She stripped vines. She trod the grape. She filled the goatskin and drank from it, and when she remembered how, at about this time of day, she should have been making the motions of drinking and smoking over an empty coffee cup and a pipe which lacked tobacco, she laughed aloud, cut herself another hunch of bread, and begged off a puff from old Rustum's pipe, filled though it was with cow dung. The gypsies, with whom it was obvious that she must have been in secret communication before the Revolution, seemed to have looked upon her as one of themselves, which is always the highest compliment a people can pay, and her dark hair and dark complexion bore out the belief that she was by birth one of them, and had been snatched by an English duke from a nut tree when she was a baby, and taken to that barbarous land where people live in houses because they are too feeble and diseased to stand the open air. Thus, though in many ways inferior to them, they were willing to help her to become more like them, taught her their arts of cheese-making and basket-weaving, their science of stealing and bird-snaring, and were even prepared to consider letting her marry among them. But Orlando had contracted in English some of the customs or diseases, whatever you choose to consider them, which cannot, it seems, be expelled. One evening, when they were all sitting round the campfire and the sunset was blazing over the Thessalian hills, Orlando exclaimed, "Oh, how good to eat! The gypsies have no word for beautiful. This is the nearest." All the young men and women burst out laughing uproariously. The sky good to eat indeed! The elders, however, who had seen more of the foreigners than they had, become suspicious. They noticed that Orlando often sat for whole hours, doing nothing whatever, except look here and then there. They would come upon her on some hilltop, staring straight in front of her, no matter whether the goats were grazing or straying. They began to suspect that she had other beliefs than their own, and the older men and women thought it probable that she had fallen into the clutches of the vilest and cruelest among all the gods, which is nature. Nor were they far wrong. Then English disease, a love of nature, was inborn in her, and here, where nature was so much larger and more powerful than in England, she fell into its hands as she had never done before. The malady is too well known, and has been, alas, too often described to need describing afresh, save very briefly. There were mountains, there were valleys, there were streams. She climbed the mountains, roamed the valleys, sat on the banks of the streams. She likened the hills to ramparts, to the breasts of doves and the flanks of kine. She compared the flowers to enamel, and the tufted turkey rugs worn thin. Trees were withered hags, and sheep were gray boulders. Everything, in fact, was something else. She found the tarn on the mountain top, and almost threw herself in to seek the wisdom she thought lay hid there. And when, from the mountain top, she beheld far off, across the Sea of Marmara, the plains of Greece, and made out, her eyes were admirable, the Acropolis with a white streak or two, which must, she thought, be the Parthenon. Her soul expanded with her eyeballs, and she prayed that she might share the majesty of the hills, know the serenity of the plains, etc., etc., as all such believers do. Then, looking down, the red hyacinth, the purple iris, wrought her to cry out in ecstasy that the goodness of the beauty of nature. Raising her eyes again, she beheld the eagle soaring, and imagined its raptures, and made them her own. Returning home, she saluted each star, each peak, and each watchfire as if they signaled to her alone, and at last, when she flung herself upon her mat in the gypsy's tent, she could not help bursting out again. How good to eat! How good to eat! For it is a curious fact that though human beings have such imperfect means of communication, that they can only say good to eat when they mean beautiful, and the other way about. They will yet endure ridicule and misunderstanding, rather than keep any experience to themselves. All the young gypsies laughed, but Rustam el-Sadi, the old man who had brought Orlando out of Constantinople on his donkey, sat silent. He had a nose like a scimitar. His cheeks were furrowed as if they're from the age-long descent into iron hail. He was brown and keen-eyed, and as he sat tugging at his hookah, he observed Orlando narrowly. He had the deepest suspicion that her god was nature. One day he found her in tears. Interpreting this to mean that her god had punished her, he told her that he was not surprised. He showed her the fingers of his left hand, withered by the frost. He showed her his right foot, crushed where a rock had fallen. This, he said, was what her god did to men. When she said, "But so beautiful," using the English word, he shook his head, and when she repeated it, he was angry. He saw that she did not believe what he believed, and that was enough, wise and ancient as he was, to enrage him. This difference of opinion disturbed Orlando, who had been perfectly happy until now. She began to think, was nature beautiful or cruel? And then she asked herself what this beauty was. whether it was in things themselves or only in herself. So she went on to the nature of reality, which led her to truth, which in its turn led to love, friendship, poetry, as in the days on the high mound at home, which meditations, since she could impart no word for them, made her long, as she had never longed before, for pen and ink. Oh, if only I could write, she cried, for she had the odd conceit of those who write that words written are shared. She had no ink, but little paper, but she made ink from berries and wine, and finding a few margins and blank spaces in the manuscript of the old tree, managed, by writing a kind of shorthand, to describe the scenery in a long blank verse poem, and to carry on a dialogue with herself about this beauty and truth concisely enough. This kept her extremely happy for hours on end, but the gypsies became suspicious. First they noticed that she was less adept than before at milking and cheese-making. Next, she often hesitated before replying, and once a gypsy boy who had been asleep awoke in terror, feeling her eyes upon him. Sometimes this constraint would be felt by the whole tribe, numbering some dozens of grown men and women. It sprang from the sense they had, and their senses were very sharp and much in advance of their vocabulary, that whatever they were doing crumbled like ashes in their hand. An old woman making a basket, a boy skinning sheep, would be singing or crooning contentedly at their work when Orlando would come into the camp, fling herself down by the fire and gaze into the flames. She need not even look at them, and yet they felt, here is someone who doubts. We make a rough and ready translation from the gypsy language. Here is someone who does not do the thing for the sake of doing, nor looks for looking's sake. Here is someone who believes neither in sheepskin or basket, but sees, here we look apprehensively about the tent, something else. Then a vague but most unpleasant feeling would begin to work in the boy and in the old woman. They broke their withes. Okay, that's interesting. They cut their fingers. A great rage filled them. They wished Orlando would leave the tent and never come near them again. Yet she was a cheerful and willing disposition, they owned, and one of her pearls was enough to buy the finest herd of goats in Brusa. Slowly she began to feel that there was some difference between her and the gypsies, which made her hesitate sometimes to marry and settle down among them forever. At first she tried to account for it by saying that she came of an ancient and civilized race, whereas these gypsies were an ignorant people, not much better than savages. One night, when they were questioning her about England, she could not help, with some pride, describing the house where she was born, how it had had 365 bedrooms and had been in the possession of her family for 400 or 500 years. Her ancestors were earls or even dukes, she added. At this she noticed again that the gypsies were uneasy, but not angry as before when she had praised the beauty of nature. Now they were courteous, but concerned as people of the fine breeding are when a stranger has been made to reveal his low birth or poverty. Rustum followed her out of the tent alone, and said that she need not mind if her father were a duke, and possessed all the bedrooms and furniture that she described. They would none of them think the worse of her for that. Then she was seized with a shame that she had never felt before. It was clear that Rustum and the other gypsies thought a descent of 400 or 500 years only the meanest people. Their own families went back at least 2,000 or 3,000 years. To the gypsies, whose ancestors had built the pyramids centuries before Christ was born, the genealogy of Howards and Plantagenets were no better or no worse than that of the Smiths and the Joneses. Both were negligible. Moreover, where the shepherd boy had a lineage of such antiquity, there was nothing specially memorable or desirable in ancient birth. Vagabonds and beggars all shared it. And then, though he was too courteous to speak openly, it was clear that the gypsy thought that there was no more vulgar ambition than to possess bedrooms by the 100. They were on top of a hill as they spoke. It was night. The mountains rose around them. When the whole earth is ours. Looked at from the gypsy point of view, a duke, Orlando understood, was nothing but a profiteer or robber who snatched land and money from people who rated these things of little worth, and could think of nothing better to do than to build 365 bedrooms when one was enough, and none was even better than one. She could not deny that her ancestors had accumulated field after field, house after house, honor after honor. Yet had none of them been saints or heroes, great benefactors of the human race. Nor could she counter the argument. Rustem was too much of a gentleman to press it, but she understood that any man who did now what her ancestors had done 300 or 400 years ago would be denounced, and by her own family most loudly, for a vulgar upstart, an adventurer, a nouveau riche. She sought to answer such arguments by the familiar, if oblique, method of finding the gypsy life itself rude and barbarous, and so, in a short time, much bad blood was bred between them. Indeed, such differences of opinion are often to cause bloodshed and revolution, are enough. Towns have been sacked for less, and million martyrs have suffered at the stake, rather than yield an inch upon any of the points here debated. No passion is strong in the breast of man than the desire to make others believe as he believes. Nothing so cuts at the root of his happiness and fills him with rage as the sense that another rates low what he prizes high. Whigs and Tories, Liberal Party and Labour Party, for what they battle except their own prestige. It is not love of truth, but desire to prevail that sets quarter against quarter, and makes parish desire the downfall of parish. Each seeks peace of mind and subserviency, rather than the triumph of truth and the exaltation of virtue. But these moralities belong and should be left to the historian, since they are as dull as ditch water. 476 bedrooms mean nothing to them, sighed Orlando. She prefers a sunset to a flock of goats, said the gypsies. What was to be done? Orlando could not think. To leave the gypsies and become once more an ambassador seemed to her intolerable, but it was equally impossible to remain forever, where there was neither ink nor writing paper, neither reverence for the Talbots nor respect for a multiplicity of bedrooms. So she was thinking, one fine morning on the slopes of Mount Athos, when minding her goats. And then nature, in whom she trusted, either played her a trick or worked a miracle. Again, opinions differ too much for it to be possible to say which. Orlando was gazing rather disconsolately at the steep hillside in front of her. It was now midsummer, and if we must compare the landscape to anything, it would have been to a dry bone, to a sheep's skeleton, to a gigantic skull picked white by 1,000 vultures. The heat was intense, and the little fig tree under which Orlando lay only served to print patterns of fig leaves upon her bright burnous. I guess that's what it's called. Suddenly a shadow, though there was nothing to cast a shadow, appeared on the bald mountain-side opposite. It deepened quickly, and soon a green hollow showed where there had been barren rock before. As she looked, the hollow deepened and widened, and a great park-like space opened in the flank of the hill. Within she could see an undulating and grassy lawn. She could see oak trees dotting here and there. She could see the thrushes hopping among the branches. She could see the deer stepping delicately from shade to shade, and could even hear the hum of insects and the gentle sighs and shivers of a summer's day in England. After she had gazed entranced for some time, snow began falling. Soon the whole landscape was covered and marked with violet shades instead of yellow sunlight. Now she saw heavy carts coming along the roads, laden with tree trunks, which they were taking, she knew, to be sawn for firewood. And then there appeared the roofs and belfries and towers and courtyards of her own home. The snow was falling steadily, and she could now hear the gentle slither and flop which it made as it slid down the roof and fell to the ground. The smoke went up from 1,000 chimneys. All was so clear and minute that she could see a daw pecking for worms in the snow. Then gradually the violet shadows deepened and closed over the carts and the lawns, and the great house itself. All was swallowed up. Now there was nothing left of the grassy hollow, and instead of the green lawns was only the blazing hillside, which 1,000 vultures seemed to have picked bare. At this she burst into a passion of tears, and striding back to the gypsies' camp, told them that she must sail for England the very next day. It was happy for her that she did so. Already the young men had plotted her death. Honor, they said, demanded it, for she did not think as they did. Yet they would have been sorry to cut her throat, and welcomed the news of her departure. An English merchant ship, as luck would have it, was already under sail in the harbor about to return to England, and Orlando, by breaking off another pearl from her necklace, not only paid her passage, but had some banknotes left over in her wallet. These she would have liked to present to the gypsies, but they despised wealth, she knew. She had to content herself with embraces, which on her part were sincere. Let's see. So we're at the end of the chapter. However, the next chapter is ridiculously long. So, jeez. That's 50 pages. So that's going to be a whole other story time all in itself. So we're going to stop here. I know we're only halfway through the appointed hour, or 2 hours that we were going to do. Yes, thank you. I don't know when you did the hydrate reminder, but very, very good point. So, let us find somebody to read. Do you have any suggestions or requests? Let's see who we have. Hang on a second. Somebody had done a self-promo. Okay, is Josu still streaming? Josu is still streaming, so, we'll raid Josu. Alright, so, the plan is still that we're going to stream tomorrow, and we'll be finishing up, Robinson Crusoe. Sorry, for some reason I totally blanked on that. So let's see. Alright. Yes, got it spelled right. Alrighty. Yes, alright. So of course, same bat time, same bat station will be doing that. Get our raid ready to go. Alright, thank you again for hanging out with me and listening to me. And I hope to see you tomorrow, where we will be finishing off our story time. Bye.